Oh, nothing. What the hell? I don't know why it worked before and not now.
Can you just try it again? Send it again.
Just did. You didn't get anything?
No. I mean, last time, yeah, kind of wasn't it phone, like phone ringing or something? No, I don't have any. Well, here's the Lunar Solidarity sent a message.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Didn't make any noise, though. All right, so where's the screen? Oh, here it is. Okay.
All right, we should call into that other number now.
What is the other number?
Oh, the number, well, I can just merge you, actually. How about that?
All right.
Uhuru.
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 So
Uhuru.
I'm getting an echo though.
So turn your computer speakers all the way down.
Okay.
Uhuru.
Hello, Marissa. How are you? Great. I'm still getting an echo, Jesse.
Still getting an echo?
Yeah. Uhuru, Raya.
Yes. Are you getting an echo now?
Yes.
You're still getting an echo, Penny?
Uhuru. No, it seems okay now.
Okay. All right. Uhuru. Okay, here we go. So who do we have on the line? Sorry, we had a little technical problem for a second. Just want to make sure I have everyone who's on the line.
Uhuru, Sandra, and Marissa. Uhuru, Janice.
Katie.
Uhuru, Katie. How are you? Good. Uhuru.
Carrie.
Oh, Carrie. Carrie Willa. Yes, Carrie from Alabama, right?
Yeah, everyone can mute. Once we get started, everyone can mute until the Q&A, at which point we'll open up the floor. That should work, or just, I don't know if you have a mute button on your phone. Who just joined us? Kitty?
Uhuru, Kitty.
All right. Uhuru, so I think we have 4 viewers online as well, and we'd like to get started. All right, so we just want to ask everyone to mute, and we have people on the line on the phone, and we're also broadcasting right now on YouTube. So this is the study of the African People's Solidarity Committee, led by our chairwoman, Penny Hess. APSC is the white organization that works under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. And these studies were inspired by the studies led by Chairman Omali Yeshitela every Sunday morning on the theory of African internationalism. And the purpose of these studies is for white people to begin to see the world through the eyes of the African working class and to learn how we can be a part of the struggle and the strategy of the African working class to overturn colonialism and win liberation and self-determination and reparations for African people. And we have a very critical role in that struggle as the white oppressor nation population. So tonight's study is really important, and it's on a piece that Chairman Omali Yeshitela wrote called The Wolf and the Double-Edged Blade, which is featured in the book Omali Yeshitela Speaks. And we also sent out a PDF to everybody to follow along in this study as well. And this piece was an excerpt of this piece has been heard by a lot of people who might otherwise not know about the Uhuru movement itself, have heard a piece of this speech that was in a song by Dead Prez and called Wolves. And this entire speech is as powerful as that one excerpt that a lot of people have heard. The entire speech is really, really worth studying and listening to and rereading time and time again, because it is one of the most powerful pieces that the chairman ever wrote or ever gave, most powerful speeches that he ever gave on the question of counterinsurgency and the struggle for Black power. So we'd like to ask everyone to mute your phones for the first part of tonight's study. And at around 8:30, we will open up the lines for question and answer. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over. I'm going to turn my camera off here and turn it over to Chairwoman Penny Hess of the African People's Solidarity Committee. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru. Thank you, Jesse. And I just really want to welcome everybody tonight. And I'm so happy that we have the ability to study this amazing presentation. I wanted to just say, if you don't have this book, Omali Yeshitela Speaks, you should get it. You need to get it. This is an amazing book published, I think, in 2006 that has a sampling of presentations from the chairman in almost every kind of situation on many, many different subjects. And it's just, you know, it's every single presentation in here is pretty amazing. And I know that in working on this book, I had the honor of being able to work on this book when it came out. I know that we chose this presentation, The Wolf and the Double-Edged Blade, we called it, that was given by the chairman actually 18 years ago tonight, May 31st in Philadelphia, one of the centers of the vicious counterinsurgency against African people, one of the places where the Uhuru movement has been in place for 30 years, 25, 30 years, and where the conditions of African people are stark, are really very, very intense. And I was there that night. I heard that presentation, and it is really one of the very best presentations by the chairman on the counterinsurgency that really gives the whole picture of the defeat of the revolutionary movement of African people that was part of the whole trend in the entire world in the 1950s and 60s that set the terms for what struggle was, whether it was in Vietnam, in China, throughout Africa, in Cuba, or with Che Guevara. And you know, it was a period when revolution was the main trend, as the chairman says, and that's what the African Revolution was and represented inside the United States. And it was a movement that was defeated with a counterinsurgency that was as sophisticated and intense and deadly as counterinsurgencies that the U.S., waged any place in the world. In fact, as the chairman mentions in here, that the COINTELPRO program, which was the name of the, I guess we would say, the most famous or well-known counterinsurgency program against the African Revolution of the 60s, the name of the person who headed that up was William Sullivan, and he was afterwards given a job against waging counterinsurgency against the people of Vietnam in their struggle. And that was the Phoenix program, a hideous program of torture, terror, and murder of the members of the Communist Party and Revolutionary Party of Vietnam of that time. And it killed about 44,000 people in this counterinsurgency. I think somebody needs to mute. There may possibly be somebody who hasn't muted. I'm just hearing some background here and hoping that you could mute. Thank you. So I think that, you know, I just wanted to say, first of all, that it's, you know, it's sort of, if we think about how life should be and how, what the potential for humanity is to live in peace, to live with no group having something at the expense of anyone else, to live in a world in which there is no state violence being waged against the majority of humanity in front of our very eyes. And then we think about the world as it really is today, a world of parasitism, a world of unending violence, of genocide, of torture, terror, endured by the majority of humanity so that the lifestyle that we have can continue on. You know, it's pretty incredible that we can, you know, that we accept this as the norm, or that any of us would, that we would say this is how life is, and there's nothing you can do about it, when the conditions were created by human beings and they can be changed by human beings and are being changed by human beings. So I think that, you know, when we look at the fact that we live in this country built off the backs of African people, built on the stolen labor of African people, the stolen land of the indigenous people, open genocide against the indigenous people, colonialism inside this country, and, you know, we just take it for granted. We live our lives. We don't, you know, we very conveniently don't see what African people experience. We walk right by it. And sometimes we pick up the banner of a struggle somewhere, you know, 10,000 miles away from where we are, without seeing that struggle is right here and those conditions are right here. And so to really think about what a counterinsurgency means, that it's a war not just against the revolutionary movement of a people, but ultimately against an entire people. An entire people. A war was going on right here, right next to us, as if we're a parallel universe with what the conditions are that, you know, exist for African people. And this counterinsurgency is so brutal. It's so incredible. You know, we can say that the Vietnamese, 44 or 45,000 Vietnamese were tortured and murdered and killed in hideous ways during the Vietnam War in this Phoenix program that targeted the revolutionary leadership and middle cadre. But when we look at inside this country and we see, you know, 2 and 3 generations since the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, of millions and millions, I mean, some people say 30 million Africans have been imprisoned by this, have lost the ability to have a family, to live, to take care of the families they do have, to be able to realize their dreams, to be able to realize their own brilliance, their own creativity, their own desire to contribute to society. You know, that we say how many thousands of Africans have been murdered by the police, gunned down as young people, with grieving parents, grieving loved ones and family and children. And I think I read that in 2015 it was 1,000 Africans killed. Well, measure that by the last 30 years, that's 30,000. And we know that it's not like it's more now, because the movement has been in Philadelphia where there could be 2 or 3 police murders a month, many at a given time taking place in just that city alone. So, I just think that not only do we have, from sitting on the pedestal at the expense of African people, do we have the ability not to see this, not to experience it, but to be able to be, conveniently ignorant of the fact that a war is going on against African people, and that that we can unite with, as white people, the criminalization of the victims of the violence of the colonial state that acts in our name to uphold our interests, to maintain our parasitic relationship with everybody else on the planet Earth. And I think that, in the 1980s and 1990s, at this height of this counterinsurgency that took the form of the war on drugs, or, any other name that it could be, in which crack cocaine and other deadly drugs were pumped into the African community, in which entire self-sufficient economic life that had existed to some extent in African communities prior to the 1960s was wiped out and destroyed. And there was an attempt that we see, the carrying out of today, of the beginnings of a gentrification, of dispersing the African population out of the urban centers, and the return of white people from the suburbs to the urban centers for a myriad of reasons, and Africans pushed into the suburbs and other kinds of things, a sort of reversal of the role that we see played out today that isolates the African community, separates them from each other, and that, this criminalization of African people. And we saw by campaigns taken on by the Uhuru movement in the 1980s and early 90s, something that Hillary Clinton, by the way, I've seen her videos criticizing her for this, but the Clinton administration calling African children super predators. And that began with a case that was in Oakland, in which an African, was he 5 years old, 6 years old, was accused of murder of another child, and basically taken to court as he's holding his teddy bear, called a super predator. Soledad O'Brien, who is on CNN or something today, has a career that was launched through that sort of campaign against that child in Oakland, who was then put on trial and sentenced so that he would be held in juvenile halls until he turns 18, which he probably must be 18 now, and then he would be sentenced to life in prison in the state of California. I mean, that we would see this, that we would see a state of California, for example, that I read has something like 2,000 or 3,000 children sentenced to 100 years or life to 100 years in prison, sentenced as children, as juveniles. And, that's just one example. That's just one thing of what this counterinsurgency means. The poverty, the inability to, it's a law. You when you rent a house, there's supposed to be a refrigerator in it. But in the African community, there's no food in that refrigerator. That there's no, just ability to have access to what is needed to live. And all of this is part of a counterinsurgency that is just so clear. It can only be defeated by a revolution, by a national liberation struggle, by an anti-colonial struggle. And this is so clear that it is colonialism inside this country. I think that this is a very powerful piece. It is just very straightforward. It's very eloquent. It makes the points that it was a revolutionary movement of African people. That movement was defeated. It was defeated in particular when it should have been over, because the Voting Rights Bill 1965 or 1964 was passed in the United States, but it didn't end the movement. The movement then became, in fact, a consciously anti-colonial, anti-imperialist movement based on the struggle for Black power, which basically acknowledged the fact that it was an anti-colonial national liberation struggle. And so therefore, once it became a revolutionary movement, clearly in which Huey Newton, the leader of the Panthers, was hosted by China, by Mao Zedong, Vietnam, and other revolutionary governments who saw it as the revolution inside the belly of the beast and their ally in the struggle against imperialism. Once it became that, it became designated very clearly for a counterinsurgency, a U.S. war against the insurgency or struggle of oppressed people rising up against their oppression and for their freedom and liberation, which is the only human, the only sane and rational thing for an oppressed people to do. So I would like to read several pages of this, and I just think it says it all so well. I would like to start on page 92, where the chairman says, second paragraph or first full paragraph, where it said that we came to understand that the issue was not about making the oppressor like us or struggling against his racism. The issue was not running around trying to educate the oppressor to stop doing something bad to us. The issue was to get power over our lives so that no matter what the oppressor thinks about us, he can't do anything to hurt us. In fact, if you wanted to, you could do a job on him. That's what became clear to us. The movement achieved that amount of clarity. It was a movement that took its ideological leadership from Malcolm X. Some people like to attribute the significance of Malcolm X and his words to Elijah Muhammad. I do not. In fact, Elijah kicked Malcolm out of the Nation of Islam precisely because he did not represent what Elijah represented. There was a tremendous split in the movement at that time between folk who believed in revolution and those who didn't. You never heard anybody from the Nation of Islam before or since Malcolm X talk about revolution. I would just say that the chairman told me that he saw a speech by Farrakhan, who usually talks about the most, neo-colonial kind of topics of supporting the US government or the mothership or some other metaphysical kind of thing, that Africans should atone for their sins, et cetera, that where he clearly had been listening to Chairman Omali Yeshitela because he was talking about colonialism and, the need for self-determination and this kind of thing, which he's never talked about before. And in fact, there's nobody out there who talks about that except Chairman Omali Yeshitela. So all over, we see so many people trying to imitate the chairman's analysis without, joining the party of the African working class, but trying to be able to articulate some of this stuff because they see that the masses of the people are drawn to it, are won to this understanding in this revolutionary period that we're in now. So that was the thing that drew the line. Somebody was talking about revolution, and Malcolm was that person. He became the ideological father, if you will, of our movement, even today. In fact, Malcolm was killed by the imperialists precisely because of where he was trying to take the movement. Malcolm was assassinated in 1965, but it was too late. By 1966, the movement was talking about power over our own lives. In 1966, the demand for Black power came out of Mississippi, exposing the real nature of the struggle that we were waging. The demand made it clear that what we want is power over our own lives. At that juncture, when the movement determined that the issue was power, our movement became like the other revolutionary struggles of oppressed people that were happening everywhere in the world. Our movement emerged as an anti-colonial movement at the moment the issue became one of power. When African workers said Black power, they united with struggles like the ones being led by Che Guevara throughout Latin America and Africa. By 1967, we saw the rise of the Black Panther Party, which took the struggle even further. The Black Panther Party was immediately and explicitly informed and influenced by Malcolm X, who told us that since it's legal to have a shotgun, every African should have one in his or her house. He also said that we should form rifle clubs all over the country. Huey P. Newton heard Malcolm X and formed the Black Panther Party. He said that it was the influence of Malcolm X and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, which was influenced by Malcolm X also, that gave rise to the Black Panther Party and what it represented. With the emergence of the Panther Party, we saw tremendous anxiety in this country. So much so that J. Edgar Hoover, who was then the executive director of the FBI, which is one of the secret political agencies of this country, characterized the Black Panther Party as the greatest threat to the internal security of the United States since the Civil War. Not Gaddafi, not Saddam Hussein, not the Russians, but ordinary African working class folk, most of whom lived in housing projects and had to use public transportation to get from one part of the city to another. It is in the masses of African workers and poor people who, given organization and ideological clarity, can achieve anything. That's the thing that Hoover and the FBI recognized. Unfortunately, not too many of our leaders today recognize that. The FBI and various military intelligence organizations were involved in crushing our revolutionary movement. We know that the Black Revolution, once unleashed, gave rise to virtually every other progressive entity that sprung up in this country. It was the Black Revolution that took white women out of the kitchen and homosexuals out of the closet. It was the Black Revolution that energized the movements of other oppressed peoples, including the indigenous people of this country. It was a powerful and profound movement that shook this country to its very foundation. After the federal government assassinated Martin Luther King, rebellions by African people surged throughout this country. I shall never forget the sight of tanks circling the White House. The government made the assumption that Africans had achieved enough organization that we might actually be able to seize the White House. The US government knows where the power is. This is why the government put in place a program to cut down and undermine the Black Revolution and assassinate our leaders. They created what we refer to as a counterinsurgency. Counterinsurgency is a military term for a type of warfare that is used against an oppressed people who are fighting for their liberation. Counterinsurgency uses every form of attack: psychological warfare, actual armed struggle, economic warfare. The primary strategic aims of counterinsurgency are resource and population control, to control the resources and the population to make sure that they never rise up again. The name of the government's counterinsurgency against the Black Revolution was COINTELPRO, short for Counterintelligence Program. COINTELPRO was the program used to assassinate and imprison our leaders and destroy our organizations. The architect of COINTELPRO for the FBI was William Sullivan. Sullivan was the man who orchestrated the murder of Fred Hampton, the beloved 21-year-old chairman of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party. Sullivan led assaults on our movement, including the attack on the Black Panther Party in Philadelphia, where the party members were stripped naked in front of the press. This was psychological warfare designed to make you demoralized and feel you couldn't win. Immediately after the defeat of the Black Revolution, then President Richard Milhouse Nixon rewarded Sullivan for destroying our movement by sending him to a post in Southeast Asia. He was supposed to make war against drugs. He was sent to an area of Southeast Asia known as the Golden Triangle, where most of the world's heroin was grown. Sullivan was sent to Southeast Asia to fight a war against drugs that we didn't even know existed. Shortly after he got to Southeast Asia, Sullivan recruited people like G. Gordon Liddy, E. Howard Hunt, and Richard Secord, who was involved in the drug scandal with Oliver North. They became part of an organization that he created, the Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement, ODALE, that later became the Drug Enforcement Administration. This agency was the origin of the heroin epidemic that hit our communities as soon as the Panthers and other organizations were taken off the streets. This was during the time when the United States government was involved in a counterinsurgency war against the heroic and courageous people of Vietnam. On the one hand, they were making war on the people of Vietnam. On the other hand, they were making war against African people here. Inside this country, the counterinsurgency took the form of heroin, pumped into our communities by the US government. Heroin was everywhere. There was not a city that was too small or too rural. If African people were there, heroin would be there. This was around 1971, 1972, the year of the founding of the African People's Socialist Party. That was the year when, as far as they were concerned, the Black Revolution and revolutionary trend in the world was supposed to be over. Then in 1979, 4 years after the defeat of the US by the Vietnamese people, we saw the Sandinistas ride into power in Managua, Nicaragua. They overthrew the Somoza regime that had been put in place by the United States government. When the Sandinistas took over Nicaragua, the strategic counterinsurgency efforts of the United States government shifted from Southeast Asia to Latin America. And guess what? It just so happens that most of the world's cocaine grows in Latin America. All of a sudden, African people supposedly lost our taste for heroin. Suddenly we got involved in cocaine. Not just cocaine, but a cocaine derivative called crack. It was something that someone went into a laboratory and created so that it would be cheap enough for the mass distribution through the African community, throughout the African community. So there was a counterinsurgency war being initiated against the Nicaraguan people and the Nicaraguan Revolution, and another war being waged against African people here. Now that the Black Revolution had been destroyed, the counterinsurgency was being waged against the entire African population to try to make sure that we stayed demoralized and powerless and would never again build the Black Revolution. This counterinsurgency takes the form of crack cocaine, the chemical warfare. This is what the United States government has done to African people. In August 1996, Gary Webb, a white guy working for the San Jose Mercury News, kicked off a series of newspaper articles revealing the FBI involvement in creating the crack cocaine epidemic in our communities. This came out in San Jose, California. It just so happens that San Jose is about 45 minutes away from Oakland, where we waged struggles from the early 80s up until now, exposing the fact that the United States government has imposed drugs in our communities. In fact, in 1989, the assassination of Huey P. Newton, we raised the slogan, "Who killed Huey? Don't tell no lie. It's the government, the FBI." They wanted to tie Huey to the drug question, but we raised the slogan, "The White House is the crack house and Uncle Sam is the pusher man." Gary Webb got fired from his newspaper job for writing those articles and came under serious attack from various other sources. Webb exposed 160 pages of actual documentation from court records and interviews with people who were involved with putting the drugs in our community. He talked about young Ricky Ross, a 19-year-old high school dropout. Ross had been a high school tennis star who quit school because he couldn't read. A CIA agent found Ricky, who had never seen cocaine in his life, and made him participate in distributing crack cocaine throughout the country. We talk about the CIA. but you know that it was the American government that put crack cocaine in our communities. The CIA is the American government. The FBI is not just J. Edgar Hoover. It was the American government attacking the Black Revolution of the 60s. In this instance, the government used the CIA to crush the morale of our community so that revolution would never rear its head in this country again. And so a movement was crushed down. As a consequence of this, chemical warfare, we don't know how many people are locked up in prison or dead. For years, the assault on the Black Power movement, the African community lived in For years after the assault on the Black Power movement, the African community lived in an era that we characterize as an era of defeat. You couldn't even talk to the masses about revolution because the last memory that people had of revolution was of tanks in the streets and militants being assassinated. They had killed our leaders in very exemplary ways. The way they killed King, they shot him in the mouth. They brutally and publicly killed Malcolm and Fred Hampton. They didn't have to kill those folk in that way. They could have fixed it so that it looked like they had a heart attack. They could have made it look as if they slipped in the bathtub and cracked their skull or had a car accident. They didn't do that because J. Edgar Hoover wanted to make it clear to young Africans, if you become a revolutionary, you'll be dead, you'll be a dead revolutionary. These assassinations were designed to demoralize the community and create a sense of the invincibility of white power, a sense that you can't fight them without dying. During this period, we would talk to African people all the time. We would say, let's get organized, let's do something. They would say, well, it doesn't make sense to get organized because every time we get a leader, they kill him. That was the sentiment in our community. In many instances, people were terrified. They would sit in a meeting like this with children present and have the door kicked in by FBI agents and other cops who ran in with their guns drawn. This was common in the late 60s. The FBI would attack a building and destroy the materials. They would take your newspaper and put them in the middle of the room and set them on fire or piss on them or other kinds of things. It was terror. This was what we had to overcome. They put the crack cocaine in our community and it demoralized the African workers and poor people who are the heart of the revolution. Then we saw all of these so-called Negro leaders attack the community, saying that the community was the problem, that we need to atone. The government wasn't the problem, they said. It was the people who were the problem. So our party had to struggle against this concept that was out there, even among the African working class itself. And what we found was that people who were out there pushing crack cocaine often thought it was their idea that they were doing this, but it wasn't their idea. What the imperialists, the capitalists, white power had done was taken away all of the other options for survival for the African working class. They were saying that if you want to live, this is what you can do to live. I'm not a hunter, but I'm told that in places like the Arctic, where indigenous people sometimes might hunt a wolf, they'll take a double-edged blade and they'll put blood on the blade. They'll melt the ice and stick the handle in the ice so that only the blade is protruding and that a wolf will smell the blood. He wants to eat and he'll come and he'll lick the blade trying to eat. What happens is when the wolf licks the blade, of course, he cuts his tongue and he bleeds and he thinks he's really having a good meal. He drinks and he licks and he licks, and of course, he's drinking his own blood and he kills himself. And that's what the imperialists did to us with the crack cocaine. You've got these young brothers out there thinking that they're getting something that they're going to make a living with. They're getting something so that they can buy a car. The white people have cars. Why can't I have a car? They're getting something so that they can get a piece of gold. White people have gold. Why can't I have gold? They're getting something so that they can buy a house. White people have houses. Why can't I have a house? They actually think that it's something that's bringing resources to them, but they're killing themselves, just like the wolf who's licking the blade. They're slowly dying without knowing it. That's what's happening to the community. Are you with me on that? That's exactly and precisely what happens to the community. Instead of blaming the hunter who put the damn handle of the blade in the ice for the wolf, what happens is the wolf gets blamed for trying to live. That's what happens to our community. You don't blame the victim, you blame the oppressor. Imperialism, white power is the enemy. It was the enemy when it first came to Africa, snatched up the first Africans and brought us here against our will, is the enemy today. That's the thing we have to understand. There can't be any compromise on that. I know your television got stolen by someone on crack. Mine got stolen too. But we can't limit the discussion and the understanding to some immediate personal contradiction that we have with somebody who's been victimized by imperialism. I know you've got a sister or an aunt or a cousin or somebody who ripped you off because they're on that stuff. But we can't limit our understanding based on our own personal relationship to it, because imperialism is making war against all of us. Your cousin got hooked first, and he becomes an instrument of imperialism when he does what he does to us in the community. The community is demoralized. This is one of the most effective tactics of counterinsurgency, because the victim actually believes he is responsible for what's going on. Then the victim becomes increasingly demoralized by his own behavior because he knows that something's wrong with what he's doing. Another thing that happens is that the drug addiction creates the political justification for militarizing our community, for taking away every right you think you've won. You think you've got some rights. You think that you've got freedom of speech or assembly, but they use the existence of the crack that they put in your community as a justification for taking away your rights from you. 34 years ago in this country, any African who would try to register to join the Democratic Party would be taken out and lynched. He would have his sexual organs cut off and stuffed into his mouth. This is America that I'm talking about. An African couldn't drive from one part of the country to the other and stop at a service station to go to the bathroom without facing death. Today, they want to convince you and I that suddenly the African population is the criminal population. Now it's the white people that are supposedly terrified of us. This is the consequence of the success of a counterinsurgency. They destroy our leaders, destroy our organizations, disperse the members of the organizations, and then turn reality upside down. The media are a part of the counterinsurgency, and they redefine the historical relationship that we've always had. Many of our own folk, in particular, the so-called Black leaders, unite with the definition that they have created for us. The counterinsurgency is not just the drugs. The counterinsurgency also takes the form of neocolonialism, which some people refer to as Negro colonialism. Neocolonialism is white power in blackface, and it's used everywhere in the world. Under direct colonialism, it was clear who was running things, because the white man was in control of every aspect of our lives. Neo means new, and neocolonialism comes about only when the masses become so politically astute that they will no longer accept obvious domination by foreigners. Then it becomes necessary for them to use what they call indirect rule, or neocolonialism. Neocolonialism is white power in black face, in a brown face, in a yellow face. Neocolonialism is white power in disguise. White power masquerading as something else. White power in a dashiki. The most significant way they can utilize neocolonialism in this country is through the electoral process. And of course, this was written years before the election, I guess 10 years before the election of Barack Obama. Look at Philadelphia as an example. It was under the boot of this terrorist thug, Mayor Rizzo, who left the planet Earth before we got organized well enough to help his exit. He bragged that he had a police department so vicious that it could defeat the Cuban army. The masses of African people rose up to try to get organized to get rid of this thug. This was the basis of a huge movement that existed in Philadelphia, the Black United Front. A Black Democratic Party hack named Wilson Goode, who never made a single move to help African people, came to the forefront of this movement. In all the years he was in the Democratic Party, he never stood up for African people. He never stood up to Rizzo. He never said, feed, clothe, and house my people. The African community got behind Wilson Goode and elected him as mayor. People worked like hell and did some fierce political work in the city. In Philadelphia, there was a remnant of our movement that didn't get wiped out, at least visibly. They were called Move. They wore dreadlocks and called themselves Africa. They were a real problem for the city of Philadelphia, and the city decided to get rid of them permanently. When Rizzo attacked and tried to get rid of Move, the African community pushed him back. In 1985, Wilson Goode gave the order to firebomb the Move house. He bragged about it. I saw him on television saying, "Yes, I gave the order and I would do it again." He had a bomb dropped on those African people. Why didn't he drop the bomb on Rizzo? When Wilson Goode bombed Move, it confused so many people. African people were in a state of denial because they had done a lot of work for this guy. They made excuses for him. What would have happened if Rizzo had dropped the bomb? Not only would Philadelphia have been on fire, but every city in this country with a black population would have been burning. They could get away with it because of Wilson Goode. That's neocolonialism. It's there to confuse the masses of the people. Today, there are an estimated 10,000 black elected officials in this country and 4 times as many Negroes who have been appointed to some kind of administrative capacity in the government. Yet the material conditions of African people in this country in 1998 are worse than they were in 1968. Not one of the 40 or 50,000 Negroes who have some modicum of power have said, "Feed, clothe, and house my people." Neocolonialism became an effective cover for white power. It can't be racism because you all got a black police chief, they say. It can't be racism because the mayor is black. And we agree with them. It's not racism, it's colonialism. Domination by a foreign and alien power over our people. A colonial power will use anybody. The British used the Kenyan rifle people, black people in Kenya. They recruited them from all over Africa, all over the British Empire. They recruited them to put down the revolution and resistance by African people. But everybody was clear that it was colonialism that they were fighting against. And that's a key thing that we need to understand. If you get into this racism trap, you can't understand why it is that Goode dropped the bomb. You can't explain why black people have been in white people's armies to kill other black people, but it's colonialism. It's the political power that we have to fight. We have to have the power. The issue is not whether white people like you. The issue is whether you have the power so that whether they like you or not, they can't hurt you. When you have power, though, you find out a lot of people will like you who didn't like you before. If you really want somebody to like you, get some power and see how many friends you'll have overnight. I'm telling you, that's what the struggle is about. It's about power. This is why neocolonialism became an important aspect of the counterinsurgency. It was the attack on the Black Revolution in the 60s, then it was drugs, then it was this neocolonialism, this white power and blackface that dominates our community everywhere. Since the founding of the African People's Socialist Party in 1972, the task of our movement has been to try to rebuild the revolution. We have worked to bring masses of African people back into political life because that is the essential character of a revolutionary period. You know you have a revolutionary period when the masses have been swept up into political life like we saw during the era of the Black Panther Party. That's when young African men and women set up free breakfast programs, established the free sickle cell anemia testing programs and security teams to monitor the police in our community. They built revolutionary consciousness among the masses of the people, bringing to them the understanding, as Huey Newton said, that the real political power comes from the barrel of the gun. In a revolutionary period, you have a mass of people who are thrown into political action, seeking to determine our own political future, seeking our own power, black power, nappy-haired power, thick-nosed power, big lip power, boombox on my shoulder power. We set the terms for what we're talking about, not the oppressor. That's the struggle. Power is the thing, and we have to have, and that's what we've been fighting for. Today, we are moving into a new era. We can no longer characterize this period that we live in as one of defeat and demoralization. Clearly, today, we live in a period of resistance and crisis for the system and resistance among more and more oppressed peoples around the world. So this is, this was written, this was stated, this happened in 1998, which was 2 years after the Battle of St. Petersburg, after the police murder of Tyrone Lewis, who was 18 years old, in a car, just two or three blocks from the Uhuru House, in which members of the party were very, very active, went right onto the scene, began agitating, and where a highly politicized rebellion ensued that represented the political consciousness of the leadership of the African Revolution being in St. Petersburg since the 1960s. And it is really, really profound. So the chairman, it was like the forerunner, as the chairman says, of Ferguson, Missouri. It was way, way ahead of anything that was happening at that time, because of the leadership and the political analysis of the party. It was a politicized insurgency is what happened. It was resistance that had a political consciousness. It didn't just wantonly loot or burn, or, it targeted the state, it targeted the media, it targeted the police stations, the police substations. It targeted white business. And it defended the Uhuru House and the African People's Socialist Party very consciously when it was being attacked on November 13th, 1996, by 300 members of the militarized police forces, the occupation forces sent in by the state to defeat and destroy and try to do to the party and the Uhuru House what they had done to move 10 or 15 years prior to that. So, it was incredible. And the chairman was talking about this period of crisis, that it's no longer the period of demoralization, something that we're really seeing come into reality today, with this incredible consciousness of the African Revolution and this hunger by young African people in particular, but not only, to not only join the movement, but to seize power, to govern themselves, to be able to, have a taste through what the African People's Socialist Party is and has done, of what self-government, what a liberated African state will be, because the party has created the basis for dual and contending power through its economic and political institutions since day one of its existence. So the party right now is getting ready to carry out, to implement its cadre development school. It's intensive. That will be through the whole month of July, which will have about 50 people participating, people coming from Africa, from all around the United States. And I think that that is just so indicative of this period, that these young Africans are hungry to be cadre, to carry out the revolutionary movement, to learn everything there is to learn about what it means to be a revolutionary. It's really clear that the chairman, that we can see has carried out this line. I mean, he's talking about racism, same thing that we're trying to take on today, racism versus the reality of colonialism. And that the chairman was just steadfast year after year, putting this out until finally reality linked up and met, what he has been predicting, analyzing, and talking about for the last, 40 or 50 years. So this is an incredible period. It's an incredible period to be alive. And I just, I want to say that. And I also want to say that the counterinsurgency inside this country was and still is so vicious and brutal. And, as part of the oppressor nation, our responsibility lies in the support and the ability of the US government to carry out this hideous war, this silent war in a certain way, against the African colonized population in our name and for our benefit inside this country. And there's so much to say about the counterinsurgency. There's so much to say about how counterinsurgency is a key factor of colonialism and maintaining colonialism. That the counterinsurgency created a political economy of counterinsurgency that wasn't just the drug and the drug economy, which is huge to the US economy and to the ability of white people to have jobs and houses and everything else, but also through the prison economy, through all of the offshoots of that, which is a multi-billion-dollar political economy in this country, through the economy of US colonial, quote, law enforcement, through the colonial military police forces that exist, which provides jobs and, all kinds of economic infrastructure inside of the white population. So this counterinsurgency is as brutal as the period of open lynchings. It's more insidious because, like the chairman said, the victim blames his or herself for this. And I think that what we have now is a new generation coming alive, understanding and grasping colonialism so clearly that it just, it makes no sense. This is the period when the African working class has come to an end to having any faith in what the colonial state can provide for it, when the colonial state is exposed as an empty shell of violence and repression against the colonized, and that can see that the only answer is revolution and are prepared to take that on. And I just, I feel for us as the white population, we see the crisis that's out there. We see the elections that the chairman has been summing up so brilliantly. And we know that there's a lot of white people who are searching, who hate the government, who have nowhere to go, but we can claim them. We can claim them. The same thing that maybe Bernie Sanders, that some white people clamor around for him. The same, perhaps, searching is what we have to claim in building the Uhuru Solidarity movement. And I know that it is building, it is moving. Jesse was telling me today that, the membership has doubled in the last year. We've doubled it. We're going to just exponentially grow in this period, and especially when we are able to continue to articulate more and more clearly to North Americans why they must stand on the side of reparations, of African revolutions, the only future for us and for all of humanity to be under the African Revolution, which the chairman has said has the responsibility on its shoulders to train all of the revolutionary forces in the entire world. So I'm going to open it up for discussion. And, again, I'm very deeply moved by this. I just want to say one other little historical fact, that there was an incredible film that a lot of us and the chairman too saw in a couple years before this speech. I think it was maybe came out in 1995, 1996, right around when the Battle of St. Pete was happening. And it was called New Jersey Drive. And I really, you can get that film, you can watch it on Amazon Video, and maybe even on YouTube. I really urge everybody to watch that film. It is the only movie that I have ever seen, and I think that perhaps the only movie that exists that attempts to show the conditions of the counterinsurgency through the eyes of the African working class, and shows the African working class as the victims of this counterinsurgency and as the genuine, as the chairman says, good people of this, of this film. It is very, very powerful. And in it, it's a film that takes place around, for white people, is called joyriding. In fact, this is a whole, this is connected to what the police killing and slandering Dominique and the 3 African young women that they killed in that car and drowned that night. The same thing, accusing them of stealing a car, etc. Well, this was about, for white people, it's called joyriding. And if you're caught joyriding by taking a car, temporarily to use it, for a white person, that's a misdemeanor. But for car theft, which is given to Africans, is a felony. And of course, the Africans are sent to prison for that. And it's about that. And there's a line in it where one of the young Africans is, he's at home, etc. And he's saying to his friend, well, white people have a car, why can't I have a car? And so the chairman is echoing that line in this historic piece that was excerpted from this presentation by Dead Prez, and which is historic. It's legendary now as The Wolves, as a powerful analysis and just allegory to the reality of the counterinsurgency of African people. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairwoman Penny. Can people hear me? Okay. All right. Well, everyone.
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. So we want to open it up now for 30 minutes of discussion. If people have any questions or comments. And I just want to once again thank Chairwoman Penny for leading this study on the chairman's piece, The Wolf and the Double-Edged Blade. Do we have any comments or questions?
Did everybody see the film that was sent out as part of the fundraiser? I'm getting a really bad echo here. Uhuru, yeah, did you? Uhuru. Yeah, I was saying, did people see the video done from Deputy Chair's office that was sent out and it's been out on Facebook on the Wolves, using the Wolves piece? It's really powerful. Uhuru. Uhuru. Oh, it's called New Jersey Drive. It's just really New Jersey Drive. Yeah, I just really think people should see it. Uhuru. I'm sorry. Oh, I couldn't quite understand what you were saying, Maurice. Oh, okay. Okay, good. Yeah. Good. Oh, so are there any comments about this piece or the whole question of counterinsurgency, what it means? No, the Office of Deputy Chair and Charles, who is part of that, made a film of using the Peace Wolves from the Dead Prez CD, and put some video with it. It's just really powerful. It's been out. It's up on the GoFundMe. You can see it at gofundme.com. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you were saying that with the Uhuru movement, we can capture some of those people that trying to be a part of this election, and they're going to be totally upset. The Bernie people in particular, when he's not going to get the nomination, and they're not going to know what to do. And a lot of them are like, well, I'll just write him in. I'm not going to do anything, or I'm going to give my, vote to the Green Party. And so it's really our time to go out and find people that relate to us. And I had done that before I got involved with this organization. I had done that by getting on those Bernie Facebook pages and the group pages that had like 25,000,
Right.
Right. And I was very strategic with what I would post. And it would really piss people off, and I did it in a way that it was pushing the blood pressure. We haven't done that today. Blood pressure.
What, could people mute? Can people mute?
Uhuru, I think Sandra, I think you need to mute. And everyone, if you're not speaking, just please mute and then unmute when you have a question or comment. Thank you.
And so what I ended up doing was doing a lot of mass friend requests of people that like or they love whatever I posted, and I'm still working through all those people that have come onto my page, but that was sort of like my way of getting them to kind of open that portal. And I posted something about Palestine, or I posted something about like there was something that Bernie had said about economic more funding in the Black community or something like that. I would post that.
Mm-hmm.
And then people would come onto my page. So I think that was it was useful. And I'm off those pages, but I'm still working with the people that actually ended up coming onto my page. But it's exposing the Uhuru solidarity movement as well as the African internationalist information out there for people. I think you're spot on with that.
Uhuru. All right. Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of Bernie supporters could support Trump if Hillary gets it, and Hillary probably will get the get to be the candidate. But I think that the thing is that, yeah, we have to, this is a time when the African movement is changing the narrative, and we have to come in there. And I think that we are, but I think that the challenge is to really get to the millions who hate the government, who hate, for whatever reason, hate the system, but want to do something besides trying to protect it, and want to, really want to see a real revolution, a real revolutionary movement. And I think this is the period to do that. Any other comments?
Right. I appreciate this study, and it is so, of course, timely always. And, this is absolutely the time that we have to get, go to every sector of the white population in every kind of way possible. But the only thing that is limited is our capacity, organizational capacity to do that. And I feel like we're perfectly positioned because of the party, because of the period, and clarities of the activism, that we can, build the reparations, which is the revolutionary work forward for us, rapidly. And I think the big challenge is for us to, really, in a concerted, strategic way, to keep growing the campaign, the organization, and throughout the country, and beyond. I'm sorry, I'm really echoing. And I said, for a wide open, and I really appreciate this study very much. I'm really glad everybody could be on that's on tonight.
Uhuru, this is just a little, I just wanted to note this, but in Sunday's, sorry, just getting a lot of feedback. In Sunday's New York Times was a book review called An American Genocide in the United States and the California Indian Catastrophe, 1846 to 1873. And, it's just documenting actually some of which is in Overturning the Culture of Violence from other sources, but about, about just the slaughter of indigenous people by the state of California and by white people in California. I definitely want to get the book, but although it sounds really sick, because he's trying to determine, apparently, if it was actually genocide because the state was weak. We understand it's the white people's state, so, and it has nothing to do with whether the state was weak. California paid millions of dollars to white people to commit genocide against indigenous people. Anyway, there's just so many things because the party is changing the narrative. There's so many books coming out that expose the parasitic basis of the U.S., the reality of what's happening, even if they put it out in this skewed, particularly white way. there's a lot of powerful information that's being exposed.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I'm taking a risk here by talking because I have both Google Hangouts and my phone here, so hopefully there's no echo chamber effect going on. But yeah, I just wanted to say a couple things about this study and this piece by the chairman. And something that you mentioned, Penny, that the 1980s was one of the highest stages of the counterinsurgency against the African population, the colonized African population inside this country. And typically, we might think of that era in which the leaders of the Black Power movement were being openly assassinated as being the height of the counterinsurgency. But as you said, and as the chairman has analyzed, that was the first phase of the counterinsurgency, was destroying the revolutionary movement. And then the second phase, which went into the 70s and 80s, was a generalization of that war against the entire African population. You didn't have to be a revolutionary or even have ever uttered a revolutionary phrase in your life to fall victim to not just colonialism, business as usual, but like a concerted effort to destroy any will or ability of the community to resist or fight back. And that the 80s represented like the apex of that, with crack cocaine, with the mass incarceration, the intensification of the police presence. And just to think about how unbelievably demoralizing that must have been for African people to have 60s and had this swell of hope and optimism based on the advances that were made, and then for it to just be violently crushed, and then for drugs to be salted to earth in the community with crack cocaine, and just to see all of that just utterly destroyed, how miserable, how unspeakably horrid that must have been. And then, and at the same time, how powerful and bold and courageous it was for the party and the chairman to stand up in that era and fight to keep the Black Revolution alive, and fight to bring African workers back into political life, and to even say that the White House is the rock house, Uncle Sam is the pusher man. Like, what a potent statement that must have been in that era, when it was all around you and no one was able to sum up where it was coming from or why it was happening, although people knew, there was some kind of sentiment. But for the chairman to say that, to make that statement, and then, years later to be able to sum it up in this presentation, I don't know, just hearing it now, I feel like understanding that historical context makes it 10 times more powerful, to understand just how against the wind and, going against the whole tide it was. And I don't know, just where we would be now if the chairman hadn't been there, and if the party hadn't been there during that time period to resist the most intense era of counterinsurgency in modern history. Uhuru.
Right. I mean, the chairman was the only voice. And, even, I mean, there wasn't even an analysis of what happened to the Black Power movement in the 60s. Not really, because there was a little bit of an understanding because of Freedom of Information Act that there had been COINTELPRO, that came out, I think, in the mid-70s, and that, the leaders were assassinated by the government. But there wasn't really an understanding of why the political consciousness of an entire people had been defeated, or even that it had been defeated. It was more that people changed their minds, or it's over now. you know, that why are you trying to go back to that? This is a new time, you know, it's over now. And when you look at the whole counterinsurgency and the way it was carried out against the entire population through the drugs, through the criminalization, and through the massive imprisonment and the militarization and open colonization, you know, of the community, you can see that it's what it's called in occupied Palestine as collective punishment, that a whole people was punished for a movement, and you know, and just what that means. And yeah, the demoralization that he's talking about, where in 1966, 67, 68, you know, the cover of Life magazine would be, you know, beautiful, Black is Beautiful, with natural haired men and women as the most gorgeous people that you could ever imagine seeing, and were, you know, even considered that by the ruling class, by white power. The whole, you know, 20 pages of pictures of just how beautiful African people were would be in magazines, and then have a few years later, like the chairman says in here, where and the whole world knew that this came out of incredible oppression in the history of enslavement, lynching, Jim Crow, you know, convict leasing, all of these hideous crimes against African people, that African people were struggling. They were the subjects of colonialism and had gone through so much, you know. And then all of a sudden, within a few years, African people were the criminals. They were the criminals, and it's still, everything is maintained today. Everything is still carried out to try to maintain, you know, that view. And that, I mean, just when the chairman says, and I've heard him say in so many different presentations, African people are good. Just to say that, you know, is like a revolutionary statement in this country. And yeah, just the demoralization from having been able to publicly, you know, and internationally experience just the heady, you know, exuberance of being so beautiful and recognized as that. Is that Paula? Sounds like Paula. You know, I mean, and I would just wanted to say also that what I think Marissa was talking about, the fact that the white population has more of a gap. The gap is larger now because of the counterinsurgency, and that in the early 80s under Reagan and everything, there, I mean, the economy was nearly at a collapse. Like what happened in 2008 in this country was put off for 20 years through this massive economic stimulus of prison building and building the infrastructure of the colonial state to gun down Africans and to, you know, to colonize and oppress people. So yeah, it definitely did create that. Yeah. Uhuru. Uhuru, Virginia.
And Chairwoman Penny, thank you for this
Uhuru.
study. And I just wanted to really encourage everyone who may not be so image of this speech by the chairman to look into it, because it's also, of course, in the book, Omali Yeshitela. But there is a video of the entire which is about the topic of Black Power, and it's so compelling to watch. And
Absolutely.
Chairman, give this speech. This video will seriously change your life, and if you are a member of the Uhuru movement or thinking about becoming a member of the Uhuru movement, it will deepen and broaden your understanding so very much of why we must focus on, of course, as white people, you know, raising reparations for African liberation, but also forwarding the political line of African internationalism and the anti-colonial struggle. So this will deepen and broaden everyone's understanding about it. So I just wanted to share that. I have found a copy of the full speech, and I put it on my Facebook and made it public. So everybody can share it for friends there or for not. So, thank you.
Okay. Good. Yes, it's really powerful to see the video.
You know, it was actually the speech that got me first introduced to Chairman Omali and the Uhuru movement. So it's really powerful.
All right. Good. Thank you, Prince. Uhuru. All right. Any other comments? Any other statements tonight? All right. Well, Uhuru. Jesse still there? Yeah.
Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Uhuru. So if everybody, okay, I guess everyone's jumping off. But thank you, Chairwoman Penny Hess, for the study tonight. And this link will be made available on YouTube. In fact, it should be available immediately once we finish the broadcast. So thank you to Chairwoman Penny and to everybody who participated in this study of the Chairman's piece, Wolf and Double-Edged Blade.
Uhuru.
And we will now adjourn. Uhuru.
Uhuru. Uhuru, everybody.